It started the day Ed Harlan came out of the woods alone. We all knew Ed and his buddies used to hunt out of season, but it kept the deer population under control, so no one in our small town cared to report him over it. They were subtle about it too. Always went out real early in the morning and never came out until after dark. Out of sight, out of mind. So when Ed came walking down Main Street in broad daylight, still dressed in his hunting gear with his rifle over his shoulder, everyone stopped and stared. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just walked right into Abe Halsey's little juke joint on the corner of Washington and Main, set his rifle down on the bar, and ordered a bottle of whiskey. Abe was nervous, but he never was one to refuse a customer. Not long after, our town's sheriff calmly pulled up a stool next to him and asked if he was okay. But Ed wasn't okay. In fact, Ed was never okay again. He had big dark circles around his eyes, and he was pale too, like he hadn't eaten in days. His hands shook as he brought the bottle to his lips, the fingers stained with dark patches of dried blood. "Where are your buddies, Ed?" the sheriff asked. Ed leaned over to him, and with the sour stench of whiskey on his breath, he whispered, "The woods took 'em." Ed was arrested, suspected of murdering his hunting buddies during some kind of psychotic break. Word was, the sheriff wasn't expecting to find any bodies, not out in the vast pine-barren wilderness where bears and coyotes would pick their bones clean before the week's end. The scandal rocked our one-stop light Arkansas town. One road in, one road out. The rest was just trees. Worst it ever got around there was the occasional DUI or domestic dispute. But there we were, a straight-up triple homicide, and folks were justifiably horrified by it. Ed was normally so warm and friendly too. Sure, he flouted the odd hunting restriction, but he was a good man, a family man. How he could do such an awful thing to his own friends, it had to be a terrible misunderstanding or accident, maybe even some kind of animal attack. But people in small towns talk, and rarely is their gossip good-natured. There were whispers of Ed's drinking habits, of the temper he hid behind his kindly smile. Those woods could be a dark place sometimes. Maybe that darkness just got the better of him one day. The next day, the sheriff went out into the woods with a handful of deputies and some cadaver dogs, hoping to find some clue to the fate of the missing hunters. 3 trucks full of men with bloodhounds, shotguns, and enough dip to keep them wired for days set off at dawn, intending to make the most of the daylight. They were waved off from Main Street like heroes. The widows wanted their men back, even if it was just to put them to rest. A few hours later, I was working the lunch rush at a local diner when I heard screeching tires from the street outside. The search party had returned early and with bad news. The bodies had not been found. The sheriff batted away questions from journalists and anxious townsfolk alike, explaining that he'd be in touch with his superiors over at the county and that they'd send additional deputies down to provide assistance. He was trying to act calm, but we could see it in his face. He was scared. We were told to go about our business as usual, but I could see the way some of the search party was acting. They'd seen something out there, in the woods, and it terrified them. When I asked my dad if we should leave town until things blew over, he scoffed at the idea. It was my final year of high school, he said, one of the most important of my education. Whatever happened out in the woods was a terrible tragedy, but we couldn't just pack up and leave. People had bills to pay, families to provide for. Mom agreed, saying those that had left town already were overreacting. Besides, there was a suspect in custody. It's not like anyone was still out there, creeping among the trees and waiting to claim another victim. I fell asleep that night with her reassurances in my ear. Mom was always so rational, so comforting, in the way that only moms seem to be. As I dozed off, I told myself that she was right, that things would get back to normal soon enough. But they didn't. They got much, much worse. The next morning, Bill Howard, whose pig farm was just a few miles down the road, was spotted driving his old pickup into town. He was a doer, a solitary man who rarely found time for social calls. He was only ever spotted during his monthly trips to the town's general store to pick up groceries. So naturally, people took notice when he brought his truck to a stop outside of the sheriff's office. They said he looked distraught, but it took until noon for the news to reach us. Something had slaughtered his hogs, every single one of them. It was no animal attack either. There was no missing flesh or teeth marks on any of the corpses. Instead, each and every pig's head had been torn from their bodies before being stacked into a pile just outside their pens. A pile that was almost twice as tall as Bill Howard. On top of that, it all happened while Bill was asleep. Normally, so much as a raccoon went near those pig pens at night, his hogs would start squealing something fierce and wake him up. But old Bill didn't hear a thing. Not so much as a whimper. Just wakes up one morning to find all his hogs had had their heads torn off. And I mean torn off, not cut. When the news about Bill Howard's hogs got around, even more people started to leave town. Not a whole lot, but you started to notice the odd family loading suitcases into the trunks of their cars, telling the kids that they're going on an impromptu vacation. Not that you could blame them. This feeling of unease seemed to hang over the community, a sense that things could only get worse before they got better. Dad just rolled his eyes and shook his head at them, but I remember my mom had this look about her, one I'd seen on the faces of more and more of friends and neighbors. "Are you kidding me, Jackie? You too with this crap now?" That night, my parents were still arguing as I climbed into bed, but beneath that anger, there was something deeper at work. Fear. But it wasn't until the incident at the church that people started to get really frightened. Pastor Mike had been the town's spiritual leader for almost 3 decades. He was a pillar of the community, present at almost all our family gatherings, both celebratory and sorrowful. He'd preached the Bible to 3 generations of our sleepy little town and knew us all by our virtues. But he also knew us by our sins. He knew every adulterer, every batterer, every problem gambler. Pastor Mike held all our darkest secrets right in the palm of his hand. Yet he'd never seen anything that shook his faith quite as hard as what he saw that morning when he walked into church. Mike walked into the main hall to find that the large white cross which stood at the head of the congregation had been utterly desecrated. It was almost completely wrapped in a web of dried roots, scratched to oblivion, and the face of Christ had been completely chipped away. In its place was a small wad of clay that had strange eldritch symbols carved into the soft brown surface. Tangled in the roots that clung to the cross were a collection of small bones, yet it was unclear which animal they had come from. He and some of his congregation spent the remainder of the day cleaning up and praying aloud together in an attempt to sanctify the place. They sang hymns, taking turns to speak passionately about the cleaning power of Christ, while a new cross was erected in place of the old one. It was an attempt to keep the townsfolk calm, but it was far too late for that, and the exodus had begun in earnest. Only this time it wasn't just trunks being loaded with suitcases full of summer clothes. It was windows being boarded up. It was frightened housewives bulk buying canned goods from the already half-depleted grocery stores. It was "Looters will be shot" signs being hammered into front lawns. All in all, about 1/3 of the town's population just packed up and left. "Bunch of superstitious rubes," my dad sneered. "Whoever messed with the church is just some punk with an overactive imagination. While this town still has a sheriff and this house still has a shotgun in it, we're not going anywhere." So, we didn't. And we paid for it. A few days later, my parents and I were sat at our kitchen table having dinner together. The mood in the house had become increasingly tense as the days passed. Mom and Dad had been arguing a lot more, so neither of them talked as I pushed the last of my green beans around the plate. It was a perfect silence, one that made the sound of the gunshot from our neighbor's yard all the more dreadful. "Upstairs, everyone now!" my dad yelled, following us up to take a small .38 revolver from a Digilock safe. "Steve, don't!" Mom begged him not to go back downstairs, but he did. He said he had to. They were some of the most terrifying few minutes of my life, hiding up in a locked bedroom, not knowing if my dad was ever going to come back. It took a full 15 minutes or so before we finally got the all clear, and I've never been so relieved to hear his voice. We went downstairs to see my dad talking with one of the neighbors. The neighbor had tears in his eyes as he told us how their toddler had been playing with their 4-year-old Labrador in the backyard when the dog began to growl. He watched in absolute horror as the thing began to twitch and shake, making sounds they'd never heard before, noises no dog should ever make. My neighbor had already grabbed a shotgun by the time the dog had lunged for his kid, and that they'd cried something awful while they dug a grave for the thing in the backyard. But when he spoke next, the look of sadness left his eyes and was replaced by something different. In a low voice, he told us he was no veterinarian, but he knew what the insides of an animal were supposed to look like. He cut that old Labrador almost in two with 2 blasts of his buckshot, but when he saw what was inside of it, it looked all wrong. It looked sick. Dad went over to help bury the dog. We figured he'd be gone for a while, but he returned in minutes. "The neighbors are staying here tonight," he said. Okay? Mom's nerves were fried at this point, but she kept a brave face. "But what happened over there? Did you help bury the dog?" "Threw a tarp over it. No one's touching that thing. We're disinfecting the whole lot, and we're calling the sheriff." As he spoke, I realized I'd never seen that kind of look on my dad's face. For the first time in my life, I actually saw him afraid. "Alex," he said after turning to me, "go help Mr. and Mrs. Perry with their bags." "Bags?" Mom asked. "Are we leaving?" "Maybe I need to talk to Mr. Perry first, but I'm coming around to the idea." "Oh, thank God." As I began to make my way out front to help the neighbors with their things, Dad stopped me. "I mean it, boy. Don't go near that tarp in their backyard." "What the hell happened, Dad? What did you see?" I asked him. I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "It was a real mess out there, but, you know, when there's an earthquake or a hurricane or something, it's the animals that are first to feel it. You ever hear that?" "Yeah, I heard that," I replied. "Look outside. Sun's setting. Birds should be chirping their feathery little butts off, but listen. Just listen to that." It was deathly quiet. I haven't heard a note of birdsong all goddamn day. "What are you saying, Dad?" I asked. "I'm saying," he sighed. "I'm saying pack a bag, just in case." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, we helped the neighbors get settled into our spare bedroom. Kate and David had only moved into the neighborhood around 6 months prior, along with their 3-year-old daughter. After putting their kid to bed, Mom poured them glass after glass of white wine, soothing their nerves after such a harrowing ordeal. But the conversation didn't remain trivial. Talk soon turned to what had been happening in town over the past few weeks. "We moved out here because we heard it was quiet," Kate said. "If you can believe that." "The murders out in the woods didn't bother us too much. I know that sounds kind of cynical. It's just, we used to live in Little Rock," David explained. "But the whole thing with the pig farm and what happened over at the church, who the hell would do something like that? I mean, we thought it was just all punks messing around with Farmer Howard at first. Went a little too far, sure, killing all those hogs. But then the church," my mom said, "seems almost satanic." "David, don't go saying those things," Kate gently scolded her husband, a sliver of fear in her voice. "I know, I'm sorry. Maybe this is a little melodramatic," he replied. "But somehow, the murders, the hogs, the church, it all seems somehow connected." Mom finished. Suddenly in walked my dad, cell phone in hand. "All right, just got off the phone with the sheriff. Told him about your dog," he said, a somber tone to his voice. "And?" "Said he'd stop by in the morning with the forest ranger to take care of it." "Did you ask him about leaving town, honey?" "About that," he began as we listened intently. "He said he didn't think it had come to that just yet. They're still waiting on those extra deputies to help out, but I asked him if he'd been in touch with any of the families that have already left. He was real cagey on it. When I pressed him, he said he might have missed a call or two from them, but I don't think he's heard back from any of them." As Mom tried to contact some of the families that had already left, our neighbor announced he was going to retrieve a shotgun from his abandoned home. "Disconnected? What in the world?" Mom looked confused. She held out her phone for us to see, but I could already hear the faint beeping of a dead number. Guys, you should come hear this," the neighbor called out anxiously from the open front door to our house. We got up from my seat, joining him at the open threshold, but as I did, I began hearing this low, scratchy, whining sound. My ears prick up, trying to work out just what the sound is and where it's coming from. Discordant, groaning, scraping sounds coming from the woods behind our houses. It was the sound of some ragged old bow being dragged across rusty, tuneless strings. It was the sound of a violin. "What in the world?" Get in the house," Dad murmured. "But Dad, get back in the goddamn house, Alex," he growled. "Right now." We were already filing back indoors by the time he had his revolver drawn, pointing it into the darkness as we headed back to safety. For hours and hours, the violin kept droning on. The mothers and children, myself included, made our way upstairs to try to get some rest, while the men stayed downstairs in the TV room, their firearms within arm's reach. But as much as we tried, sleep was almost impossible. No matter what, we could all still seem to hear that wretched screeching, echoing through the trees outside. Yet, somehow, some way, I must have drifted off to sleep, because the next thing I remember was my dad shaking me awake. Alex, wake up!" Through tired, fuzzy eyes, I could see bright, red light spilling into the room. "Don't make a sound, but you gotta get up for me, buddy." I sat up with a jolt, throwing on my chucks before following Dad downstairs. "Where the hell is that red light coming from?" He thrust something at me before I could finish. It was the wooden bat I'd played Little League with. "Take this." But why?" I asked. His reply made my blood run cold. "Something's outside." According to Dad, he and Dave were still keeping watch when the sound of the violin finally stopped. But no sooner than it had, the entire house was bathed in that hideous red glow. That's when they'd heard it, shuffling around in the grass outside, and I heard it too. As the three of us stood there, silent as the grave, we could hear whatever it was out there creeping around the edge of the house. Slowly but surely, it lumbered its way around to the front yard. "Do we say something?" David frantically whispered. "No, stay quiet," Dad hissed in reply. With shaking hands, the men traced the movement of the thing outside with barrels of their weapons as it shuffled further and further towards the front door. Then we saw it. Through the frosted glass of a small panel window on the front door, we saw the shape of something hobble into view. "What the hell? Who is that?" I remember saying out loud. Dave? Dad hissed. Rack the shotgun. What? Rack the goddamn shotgun! Loud! The neighbor did so, the satisfying mechanical chick-chuck, like a roar in the horrid sanguine glow. We're locked and loaded in here, Dad barked, aiming his revolver at the doorframe. Now get off my property before somebody gets hurt. On the other side of the door, the shape appeared to cock its head. Alex, call the sheriff, Dad said, trying to sound as calm as possible. I pulled my phone out, hammering 911 into the touchscreen. The line was busy. I hung up and tried again. Still busy. Dad, I can't get through. Try mine, he said, tossing me the phone from his pocket. It's got his cell. I frantically searched the phone's contacts before finding the number, bringing the handset to my ear as it dialed. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please hang up. Damn it! My hushed curse was all the indication Dad needed. Just try it again, boy. Take your time. I did, but over the looping metallic tone, I heard something that made me about jump out of my skin. Smash. The shape outside was pounding on the door. Oh, God! Our neighbor whimpered, the shotgun trembling in his grip. You break in here and we will shoot you! Dad barked. Another smash against the door. Okay, David, Dad said, his voice trembling as he tried to remain composed. If they break in here, you shoot until they're not moving anymore, you got it? I got it! Smash. The sanguine glow outside seemed to grow in intensity for a moment, almost buzzing for a moment as the hammering reached its peak. The door was shaking with every impact now, like it might crumble away at any moment, and through the din, we could hear our neighbor's infant girl wailing in distress. Get the hell away from the door or we shoot! Dad barked as the shape on the other side hurled itself against the door. And suddenly, it stopped. The battering ceased as the red glow faded into darkness. We all stood there for a few moments in the pitch darkness, wondering if it was really over, the only sound being the wails of the baby upstairs. Where did it go? The neighbor finally whispered. I don't know, Dad replied. Should we check? No, we're not going out there, Dad said, lowering his weapon. Go see your kid. I'll keep watch down here with the boy. We watched as a very shaken David placed his shotgun on the TV room's coffee table before heading upstairs to console his crying child. Here, Dad said solemnly. Give me a hand with this couch. As we slid the large three-seater up against the front door, I asked my dad what he thought was going on. Look, I don't know exactly, but the cops are going to catch whoever's doing it. Everything is going to be fine, Alex. But for whatever reason, things aren't safe here right now. Then what are we going to do? I asked. We can't do anything without daylight, he replied. I could go talk to the sheriff in the morning, but something tells me a lot of other people are going to have the same idea. Want me to try his cell? Want me to try again? You could try. Don't expect an answer, though. I get the feeling we're not the only people to get a visit tonight. You should go upstairs and check on your mother. Maybe get some sleep if you can. But you'll be fine, Dad replied, finishing my sentence for me. I'll be fine. Now go check on your mother. Dad was right. Ours was not the only home that had been attacked that night, and the sheriff sent his deputies out to spread word of a town meeting. Within an hour, almost 100 frightened residents piled into the freshly pre-sanctified church, each desperate for answers. "What the hell tried to break into our home last night, Sheriff?" they cried out as the sheriff addressed the crowd. "Where were you? We were calling all goddamn night." The sheriff simply stood there for a moment, soaking up the discontent. There was a deep exhaustion in his face, like the events of the past few weeks had somehow aged him by a decade. When he finally spoke, everyone fell silent. "I understand that you are all deeply concerned about the events of the past few weeks," he began. "But some of you here asked me questions I simply don't have the answers to. The only thing I can do is tell you what I know right now." The crowd was tense. You could hear a pin drop. "Almost a week ago now, I called the county for additional deputies to help us find the bodies of those missing hunters. The brass down there called me a couple days later, told me the deputies were on their way. Those deputies never arrived here in town, and the county hasn't been able to get any of them on the horn." There was nervous whispering among the assembly. "As for the families that left town in the days after the incidents, I haven't been able to get in touch with a single one. All their phones are dead, relatives ain't seen them. It's like they dropped off the face of the earth." The nervous whispering swelled into frightened murmurs. "I don't know who's been harassing this town. I don't know who attacked your homes last night, and I'm sorry I wasn't there to do more." His voice grew shaky as he spoke. "But what I can do is offer to head up a voluntary mass evacuation, starting first thing tomorrow morning." "We can't wait that long, Sheriff," someone yelled. Pockets of panic began to bubble among the townsfolk. "Now, people, we've lasted this long. We can last one more night. As far as I know, no one was hurt last night, were they?" He looked around the room expectantly. "See? It could be whatever's doing this is just trying to scare us. But at this point, quite frankly, I don't want to take that chance. So there'll be... Where are the McTells?" someone suddenly called out. The sheriff leaned over to a deputy who whispered something in his ear. "I believe the McTells left town a couple nights ago," he said. "Nah, Sheriff. I saw Ted in his driveway yesterday evening. They're here all right," another voice from the crowd announced. "Now, I called at their house this morning, I swear," said the baby-faced deputy, alarm creeping into his voice. "No one answered. I figured they just up and left." A group of men near the back stood up from their chairs and bolted out of the meeting hall's doors. The crowd got up and followed, listening to the sounds of manic revving and screeching tires as the men took off in pickups towards the McTell house. The house was just a few blocks away, so those capable of doing so pushed their way to the head of the crowd and began running in the direction of the fresh tire tracks. By the time we arrived, they had already kicked in the front door and were in the process of searching the house. A man walked out of the open front door so pale he almost looked green before spewing up his breakfast onto the lawn. Another joined him, tears in his eyes as he tried to console his nauseous friend. I don't know what compelled me, but I started walking towards the house. Dad stopped me with a hand on my chest, silently shaking his head. He was looking at something in one of the top windows. You could tell it was a kid's room. The wallpaper was plastered with goofy-looking colorful cartoon characters, but on the window pane was the single bloody smear of a handprint. The McTells were dead. Ted lay dead in the doorway of his child's bedroom, his eyes a milky white. Inside, the arms of his dead wife were frozen around the body of their toddler. Both corpses showed signs of being eaten. No one wanted to wait any longer. The exodus had begun. Less than 2 hours later, trucks and cars laden with people and belongings lined up along Main Street in a kind of ragtag convoy of terrified townsfolk. At its head was the sheriff's Escalade. A huddle of armed men gathered around it. Eventually, the sheriff walked up and down the lines of cars, informing people that we'd be waiting a little longer to see if any others showed up. But it was already nearly late in the afternoon by that point. There were only a few hours of daylight left and people were starting to get nervous. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait much longer. The sheriff and his armed escorts let out whistles and shouts, piling into their vehicles and gunning their engines as the convoy finally began to get moving. I remember looking out of our car's window at the place I'd spent the first 19 years of my life in, wondering if I'd ever live to see it again. It was only during the drive out of town that we began to see just how different the woods were. They were hideously overgrown. The bark of the now mammoth trees cracked and warped from the strain of their rapid growth. A thick canopy of leaves and twisted branches had formed, plunging all that passed underneath them into shadow. Mom and I gawped out of the windows, awestruck by the terrifyingly unnatural flora, while Dad struggled to keep his eyes on the road. After a few more miles of smooth driving, the convoy began to slow to a crawl. Tension grew in the car as we waited to discover the cause. In large rough patches, the road had been torn up and rendered impassable. We had to get closer to see exactly why. Roots. Twisting woody tendrils had slowly erupted through the concrete. It was so bad in places that we were forced into a kind of slalom, the convoy swerving back and forth as it slowly edged around each hideous obstacle. But before long, the convoy yet again ground to a halt. "The hell is it this time? Come on, get moving!" Dad growled. But no one moved. Instead, people began to slowly get out of their cars. Reluctantly, we joined them, walking to the sides of the road to get a glimpse of the holdup. And what we saw terrified us. A long line of cars, just like ours, was lined up at something that, at first, made me think I was going crazy. It wasn't just roots that had eaten up the road. It was entire trees. Huge, fully grown trees had sprouted up through the tarmac, completely blocking our path. But that's not what scared me. That's not what had the other townsfolk crying and crossing themselves. It was the cars. They all belonged to people that had tried to leave town in the weeks before, and they were all abandoned. Jesus Christ. What happened to them? "Keep calm, people," the sheriff's voice echoed down the line. "We're gonna find ourselves a way through this." I watched one of the armed escorts produce a chainsaw from the back of his truck, the small, tinny engine growling as he started it up. Other men produced a variety of axes, knives, and hatchets, all before joining in the attempt to clear the road. No one asked how those trees could have sprouted up so quickly, or how a road that was clear just a few days ago was now completely impassable. Because the answer was that it was impossible. What was happening was impossible. "Oh my God, look!" Mom opened her mouth, pointing off towards the side of the road. She was looking at the base of one of the huge gnarled pine trees that towered above us. There, a black, festering fungus shimmered in the dim light. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, and it was moving. Consumed with morbid curiosity, my eyes were transfixed on the grotesque fungus. I didn't see when a man behind us hit the tarmac. There was a startled cry from the man's wife before bystanders rushed to his aid. As they kneeled around him, calling out his name, blood began to pool beneath his head. Something had fractured the back of his skull. Then, we saw them. They tore through the trees either side of us, ashen bodies with horns sprouting through matted hair, howling as they charged. Anyone with a firearm immediately opened up when the gray horde stampeding towards us. But they were fast, and they were many. In an instant, they were on us. Clawed limbs punctured organs, while teeth, black from rot, ripped away flesh from bone. People began to panic, jumping back into their cars trying to escape. But it was no good. The way back was blocked by other vehicles. Cars and trucks smashed into each other, crushing the bodies of the dead and dying alike. I distinctively remember the man with the chainsaw using it to slice into the torso of one of the beasts, a spray of red mist thrown up from the open wound. It was chaos. One of the things rushed Dad, screeching as it came. One shot from his .38 brought it down, but it kept crawling, cackling as it dragged itself towards us. I felt the baseball bat in my grip and stepped forward to finish it off. Over and over and over again, I brought the bat down on that thing's head with all my might, and by the time Dad stopped me, the fighting had ceased. My arms were covered with flecks of blood, the corpse of the thing beneath me twitching uncontrollably, but there would be no respite. A blood-curdling scream erupted from one among the survivors. In her hand, she held a set of the creature's horns, revealing them to be nothing more than a part of a primitive, woven headdress. And they didn't have clawed hands at all, simply sharpened sticks they'd tied to their forearms, and there was evidence the first of our number had fallen following the well-placed throw of a rock. People began to examine the bodies that hadn't been shot to pieces in the ambush, and as they did, made a horrifying discovery. These weren't a pack of monstrous creatures, somehow spawned by the woods. They were the people that had tried to leave town in the weeks prior. We lost a lot of people that night on both sides of the fighting, people I'd known all my life, but they were losses we didn't have time to dwell on. In a daze, we survivors got to work pushing aside the now ownerless cars before hauling off the dead and covering them as best we could. Then, bloodied and shaken, with the wounded lying in the back of the pickups, we turned around and headed back the way we came. Back into town. Back into the nightmare we'd been so desperate to escape. It was a ghost town, not a soul in sight. The desolation was chilling. That ragtag convoy of survivors tailed the sheriff's vehicle back to the sheriff's office, and no one dared to go anywhere alone. Those that didn't follow him inside waited in their cars as armed men stood guard around them. The sheriff unlocked the armory, telling deputies to hand out weapons and ammunition to those in need. The wounded were given aid, but more tears were shed when it found that many of them had succumbed to their injuries on the ride back. One by one, people began to notice that they had no signal on their cell phones. Panic rippled through us. Hope was wavering thin, but the sheriff was quick to reassure us. The department had a satellite phone in case of emergencies. Dad and I watched him make the call on a line that should have been crystal clear, but the distortion was so audibly bad that the sheriff had to repeat himself over and over, shouting into the handset to be heard. He told his superiors that they were cut off and that we needed air ambulance units. We hung on to every word, trying to gauge the response from the other side. It was no good. They didn't seem to grasp the severity of the situation. We needed the National Guard, but they'd take 24 hours to get to us. An air ambulance could arrive within an hour, but we needed a fleet of them. In the end, it seemed the best they could do was send 3 helicopters to pick up the survivors in 2 runs, one within a couple of hours, the next at dawn. It was decided. The women and children and wounded among us would be airlifted out first. Then, it would be up to the remainder to survive until morning. It was deathly quiet before the first helicopters arrived. In the late summer, Arkansas nights are invariably scored by a symphony of crickets, but not tonight. No one had seen or heard any wildlife for quite some time. We were huddled together, terrified and skittish, and we felt like prey. Dad and I argued in hushed voices about the prospect of me getting into the first flight of helicopters. I flat out refused. There was no way I could abandon him. I reminded him that I wasn't a child anymore. I expected him to seethe with anger that I'd talk back to him, but he didn't. "It's not that, Alex," he said, sadness creeping into his voice. I just can't watch you die here." The reality of the statement was horrifying. We were in a situation in which the last thing we might ever see would be the violent death of a loved one. The thought was unbearable, yet I still couldn't leave him. But I wouldn't get the chance to argue my point. Every conversation was silenced by the emergence of a man from the department's jail cells. Heads turned, jaws dropped. It was Ed Harlan. "Extenuating circumstances." The sheriff followed him out, uncuffing him in front of the nervous audience. "Good to see they let you out, Ed." A nervous voice spoke up from the darkness. Ed didn't say a thing in reply. He just nodded, heavy hunting boots thudding as he walked over to the open gun locker and took out a 12-gauge. We're sorry about your buddies," said another. He stopped racking shells into the shotgun for a moment and looked at the man, and we could all see that there was just nothing behind his eyes, like a piece of his soul had been left out in the woods the day he walked back into town. Without a word, he walked outside onto the concrete steps of the sheriff's department, stopping only to take a pack of cigarettes from a man's shirt pocket. There, he lit one up, starting out into the darkness, the loaded 12-gauge on his shoulder. We didn't hear a single word out of Ed's lips for the rest of the night, even when the first helicopters began to arrive. "They're here! Thank God they're here!" Someone cried as the muffled thudding of distant rotor blades became audible. We rushed outside into the darkness, seeing the distant helicopter's lights blinking red and white in the night sky. One of the sheriff's deputies fired off a flare gun at the corner of a nearby intersection, illuminating the potential landing area with a warm orange glow. The chopper's downdraft kicked up dust and debris as they took turns landing at the intersection. We helped load up the wounded. Screaming can be heard over the cacophony of rotor blades. Men hugged their wives and children, some shedding tears, the uncertainty of their separation being too much to bear. No one knew when or if we'd see each other again. Then as quickly as they'd arrived, they were gone. We watched as they ferried the most vulnerable of us to safety, their blinking lights growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. There were just 11 of us then, less than a dozen compared to the hundreds of people that had occupied the town just a week before. And as my eyes flickered between the fear-carved faces of those that remained, something terrible occurred to me. The attack on the convoy was preceded by the roaring of chainsaws and the clacking of axes splitting wood. The noise had drawn those twisted beings from the deepest, darkest reaches of the woods. If we summoned a pack of feral people with just the revving of a chainsaw, what in God's name would 3 helicopters attract? In the dead of the night, we got to work transforming the quaint county sheriff's office into a veritable fortress. We smashed up all the tables and chairs we could find, nailing wooden boards over exposed windows. The exterior of the building looked like a light show with torch beams crisscrossing each other as men armed with shotguns scanned the tree line. As I peered out of a crack in one of the boarded-up windows, I overheard the sheriff approaching my dad. "Can the boy shoot?" "He's fired at 22 over at his grandpa's house. Nothing bigger." "Every man here needs to be armed, Steve. I know that's not..." "No, I get it," my dad replied. "I give him my .38, but kicks like a mule." That was not the response I was expecting. "I'll have one of the deputies give him his 9mm. Should be enough for him to handle." I should have been proud that my dad thought that I was ready for that kind of responsibility, that in a time of crisis I was trusted enough to help. Yet it did nothing but terrify me. If I was being given a firearm to defend myself with, things were as bad as they could get. It was about then that I noticed one of the flashlights outside began to flicker. The man holding it shook the thing for a moment, smacking the end with an open palm, but it didn't help. It died in his hand as I watched his expression fade from confusion to panic. Another of the men went to his truck to grab a spare battery when his flashlight failed too. Then another man's light faded, then another's, until one by one, every flashlight outside the station flickered out. "Dad," I said quietly, "something's happening." No sooner than I'd spoken, the lights in the sheriff's department cut out too. We were plunged into complete darkness for a moment before several lighters sparked into life, bringing just a flicker of light back to us. "What the hell?" someone asked. "Power's out all over town. I don't know, just be ready," one of the deputies said nervously. But we could never have been ready for what came out of the woods that night. Never. From deep in the tree line, that same grim crimson glow began to emanate through the trees, bathing the entire area in a sickly, sanguine glimmer. That's when we saw them. 4 figures walking slowly towards us through the woods. Not one of them made a sound. They just stood at the edge of the tree line, 4 motionless silhouettes, watching us. It was Ed Harlan who first spoke. "That you, Henry?" One of the figures shifted a little. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. "No wonder we couldn't find the bodies." The sheriff rushed outside, dragging Ed back into his office before he did anything reckless. He'd been locked up for just over a week for the murder of his buddies. Yet there they were. Only, they were different. Once Ed was back inside, we locked the door and piled furniture against it for what we assumed would be the inevitable assault. When it came, it was worse than I could have ever imagined. Since the only light was the faint red glow that seeped through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, the deputies rushed to retrieve some oil lanterns from the station's storage room. Once lit, they revealed something in a corner of the department's reception area, something that wasn't there before. It was a hole. Or to be more precise, one large hole in the floor surrounded by many smaller holes that appeared to have been freshly bored into the wood. "What the hell?" someone remarked, edging towards the deep, dark opening. "Hey, keep away from that thing," someone hissed. But that man didn't listen. Suddenly, what could be best described as a huge black-legged tick scuttled out from the cavity and across the floor with lightning speed. The curious man aimed his shotgun at the creature, but it was too fast. It leapt onto the top of the weapon, scuttled up the stamped steel, then lunged, plunged its mandibles into the soft flesh of his neck. He opened his mouth to scream, but all that came out was a wet gargle, and for a moment, we were mesmerized by the stomach-churning sight of the tick thing's blood sac, swelling and darkening as it filled with the dying man's blood. I don't know who fired the shot that turned the tick thing into a slurry of black gore. It didn't matter that its victim took a peppering to the face either. He was already dead. Another man fired a few shots down what we now realized was a tunnel. "Someone cover that thing over, for Christ's sakes," the sheriff cried. We flipped a table and used it to block off the tunnel's entrance, a temporary solution to a much greater problem. Hey, something's outside," someone barked. "One of the missing hunters?" another asked. "Nah, ain't like what attacked the cars either. This thing's fast. Real fast." "Jesus Christ," another yelped. "I saw it too. What in the name of God is that thing?" The next thing I know, the screech of heavy furniture raking against a hard floor echoed around the room. There were terrified screams as we prepared to face the terrible new threat, only to find it was Ed Harlan making the noise. He was removing the barricade and unlocking the front door. "Hey, Ed! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ed remained silent. He just closed the door behind him and disappeared. "Goddamn coward!" We rushed to replace the barricade, fearing the thing outside might come crashing through the sudden weak spot in our defenses. But it didn't. Whatever was out there didn't even make an attempt. Ed's flight might just have been the distraction we needed, but our luck didn't last. Minutes later, something smashed into one of the boarded-up windows to the rear of the sheriff's office. One of the men struck the barrel of his shotgun through the newly smashed gap in the barricade, firing off a few shells before a howl of pain could be heard from outside. Then, a deep thumping sound on the roof of the office made us freeze. Something heavy, something huge, was moving around up there. I felt the goosebumps on my skin as a deep silence settled over us for the first few moments, waiting for the thing to move again. What came next was an explosion of masonry and wood splinters as the roof came crashing down around us. And even before the dust had cleared, we could all make out the huge bipedal beast that suddenly stood before us. It turned to me, black eyes looking out from grotesque avian features, and the screech that followed was so ear-splittingly loud that I thought my skull might split from the sheer force of it. I closed my eyes, dropping to my knees as the nightmarish images of rot and decay flashed behind my eyelids. Then, just as sudden as it occurred, I was free from the agony. When my vision fully returned, the first sight to greet me was that of the beast, splayed out on the floor, torn apart by shotgun blasts. Only whatever eldritch life force the beast possessed wasn't entirely extinguished. It began to twitch and fracture, splitting apart. Then we watched in utter horror as the huge avian beast's limbs took on a sentience of their own, sniffing the air before squirming hungrily towards us. Another burst of shotgun fire followed terrified screams from the traumatized survivors. Then the thing moved no more. A moment later, we heard yet another roar approaching the sheriff's office, only this one was much more welcome to our ears. It was the sound of a pickup truck tearing along Main Street and past the sheriff's department, crashing into the nearby field and towards the glowing red tree line. Music was blaring from the open windows, a tune that sounded vaguely familiar to me.
That's Ed Harlan's truck. Is he out of his goddamn mind?
Someone exclaimed. The pickup braked just before crashing into the trees. Ed Harlan got out, then pulled away a tarp covering the rear storage, revealing its cargo. Gas canisters, maybe 24 of them, were stuffed into the truck bed. One by one, Ed began unscrewing the caps before emptying the volatile contents into the tree line.
Jesus Christ, if he sets that fire before rescue arrives, the choppers won't be able to land for the smoke. Goddamn idiot.
One of the deputies barked. No one moved to stop him. We just watched as he repeated the process time and time again until we could smell the stench of gasoline on the breeze. It was the single longest night of my life. But death would be a small mercy compared to the fate of those that attacked us at the roadblock of twisted tree trunks. Yet just as the last dregs of hope were being burned up by the horror of what faced us, the thudding of distant rotor blades could suddenly be heard. They had finally come back for us. It was almost over. Weapons at the ready, we rushed out of the sheriff's office, the helicopter's spotlights lighting up the nearby intersection as they prepared to land. We could see things moving in the shadows all around us, hungry for one last chance to strike. Men were still firing at nightmarish shapes around us when the choppers touched down, still popping off shots as we piled into their cavernous bellies, traumatized and exhausted. In the distance, I watched Ed Harlan splashing the last of his gasoline amongst the trees as the same 4 figures reappeared next to him. Ed stopped, staring at them for a moment. Then, as the helicopter I was on took off and rose up into the night sky, the woods below me burst into flames. As a huge fireball rose up among the treetops, the flames spread with terrifying speed, engulfing Ed Harlan and his 4 missing hunting buddies. The conflagration swallowed up the dry foliage, spilling through the pines until it scorched and ignited some of the buildings on the edge of town. Tree after tree was consumed by the inferno, and as we watched them burn, I swear I could hear the woods scream. Tears streaked my solemn stare as I watched everything I've ever known turn to ashes before my eyes. And it was only then that I realized what song was blaring from the stereo system of Ed's battered old pickup truck. It was an old Hank Williams tune. I'll gas up my hot rod stoker. We'll get hotter than a poker. You'll be broke, but I'll be broker. Tonight we're setting the woods on fire. United States Department of Defense. Classified document. Access restricted to DV security clearance. Distribution will result in arrest and prosecution under Section 2B of the United States Espionage Act, 1917. The following is a copy of a handwritten letter seized from Operator 734-812, call sign, Horace. March 11th, 2017. Hi, Mom. I'm so sorry I haven't wrote to you in a while, but this new unit doesn't allow outside communication. They don't know I'm writing this, so please keep it to yourself, and don't show or tell anyone, not even Dad or Steph. I miss you all so much, but please, you have to keep this secret. Honestly, I think I made a huge mistake in volunteering. I knew SEALs were going to be hardcore, but this new unit is on another level. I signed up to the military to serve our country and make Dad proud. I thought volunteering would be doing the right thing, but the stuff they make us do is just wrong. I don't know who the hell I'm working for anymore. I don't even think they're subject to any kind of federal oversight. And then the kind of crap they got us dealing with? I've never been so scared in my whole life. It makes Syria seem like summer camp. First operation was last night, and I feel sick to my stomach just thinking about it. We were attached to a section of the CIRG, CIRG, or the Critical Incident Response Group. They're the FBI's counterterrorism guys. Think SWAT, but with more expensive toys. But instead of going in with our own uniforms and patches, we were given a bunch of their stuff to wear. Then told to say that we were part of Counter IED team out of San Francisco. They were so nice to us, Mom. Treated us like their brothers, and what we did to them was just... it was evil. They kind of figured something was off when they saw we had a helmet and weapon cameras attached to our gear. They had all the recording equipment taken away from them prior to the operation, but like many of us, they didn't openly question it. Ours not to reason why, ours but to do and die, one of them said. Told us it was from a poem, but I don't know which one. The CIRG guys thought that we were there to handle any explosive materials found on site, but in reality, our orders were to observe and contain. I didn't really know what this meant at first. The only other thing we were told is that anyone declared hostile was to be immediately eliminated. I thought that might mean any bad guys we found at the scene, but Mom, we were the bad guys. I don't know exactly where the op took place. All I know is that we flew out of SeaTac up in Washington, then landed near some old cabin in the sticks. The CIRG team was waiting for us there, and not long after we landed, we moved on the cabin. The cordon around it was almost half a mile in every direction, and I figured this was to fool the CIRG guys into thinking there were some legit explosives on site. But now I know that cordon was there for a damn good reason. They didn't want anyone else to get infected by what was inside. I don't know exactly how they guaranteed we wouldn't be infected. I think there was something inside our helmet lining that kept it out, but whatever it was, the counterterrorism guys didn't have it, and I know that it was on purpose. We figured almost right away that no one was living there. There were no signs of habitation whatsoever. But they still had us clearing the place like there could be bad guys around every corner. We were ordered to take it nice and slow, like old school, methodical room clearing, kind of like back in SEAL training. But that wasn't because Command wanted to minimize casualties. They wanted the CIRG guys in the cabin for as long as it took for it to infect one of them. At first, the place looked like any other cabin in the woods. Open plan stove and cooking area, bunks in one room, butcher's table and meat grinder in another. All looked totally normal. But then it came to clearing the root cellar, and that's when things got real scary. Whoever dug the place out had it pretty spacious, but there were no storage spaces whatsoever. Everything was bare except for a few supports to keep it from collapsing, everything except the cellar floor. Someone had laid down some partial wooden flooring in the shape of a big triangle. It was thick too, jammed down into the dirt so tight that it looked like someone had dug it out instead of fixing it into the earth somehow. Only when we got closer did we start to see all the symbols on it. It was a real piece of work, like someone must have spent days, maybe even weeks, carving all that stuff into it. I've never seen anything like it before, not even in the language school we got sent to for about a month to be able to recognize Arabic and Cyrillic and all those other kinds of letters. One of the Sir guys said it looked like something a crazy person would make, no rhyme or reason to it at all. But to me it looked deliberate, very deliberate, like someone had taken painstaking steps to ensure each one was perfect. Then, for the first time since we landed, me and the other operator heard the voice of our commanding officer speaking into our earpieces. He told us to focus our weapon cams on the triangle and to not move them away until we were told. We had to stand there for a good few minutes before we got new orders to back into the corners of the cellar, facing the Surg guys. They, on the other hand, were told to just stand by to await further orders. We could hear everything they could, but they couldn't hear everything we could. A few minutes went by and the Surg guys are just milling around, shooting the breeze, wondering out loud how long they'd have to stay down in that cold, damp cellar before the op came to a close. Guys like us are used to waiting, Mom. You know that. All Dad ever talks about when he brings up the golf is the whole hurry up and wait thing. Wait orders are basically no orders, and that's when that killer boredom sets in. But me and the other operator were told to observe and not take our helmet cams off the Surg guys. I had a feeling something was going to happen with them, I just didn't know what. But when it did finally happen, I swear to Jesus, Mom, I've never seen anything so terrifying in my entire life. All the Surg guys were talking among themselves, discussing family stuff, using each other's kids' names and stuff. And then all of a sudden, one of them stopped talking while in the middle of a sentence, and we all knew something was wrong. The guy was all talkative and animated 1 second, and then the next, he was silent. He'd been saying something about how one of his kids was always unscrewing nuts and bolts around the house, how he was shaping up to be a regular handyman. He was miming the motion of little hands picking at a bolt, trying to unscrew it, then he suddenly started stumbling over one particular word, saying it 3 or 4 times over before his arms just dropped to his sides. That's why I noticed that he happened to have been standing almost right in the middle of that wooden triangle, the one with all that weird-looking symbols on it. Lit up only by the flashlights we had on their helmets and weapons, the Surg guy started twitching, real subtly at first, but then the twitches got more and more violent. Then he started talking again, only everything that came out of his mouth sounded like complete gibberish. Only it wasn't just gibberish. It was incomprehensible, all right, but just like the symbols on that big wooden triangle, it was like purposeful. There was a meaning behind all the stuff he said, even if it was a meaning that none of us could recognize or understand. The other Surg guys tried to help him, asking what was wrong and trying to contact their command to call in help, but their communications weren't working. Someone back at the cordon must have disabled them. That's when they asked me and the other operator to check our comms and call in help if we could. I actually moved to do so, and that's when I heard the voice come through my earpiece again. It just said, Horus, which is my call sign. Do not engage. Observation only. I just put my hands back on my weapon and did as I was told, focusing my eyes and my helmet cam back on the Surg guys. Then, I swear to God, Mom, I swear on Grandpa's grave, I watched as the guy's eye protection began to fill with some kind of dark fluid. It started slowly, but then it was clear for all to see. His goggles were filling up with blood. And as it started to leak out down his cheeks and around his nose, the Surg guys started freaking out. They were trying their comms again, screaming into their mouthpieces that they needed urgent assistance. And when they turned to us again, there was anger in their voices. One told us, "Don't just stand there." Another asked us, "What the hell's wrong with you?" But I just did as I was ordered, Mom. I just stood there and watched as the guy's words were choked off by something in his throat. And then, in an instant that horrified every single person in that cellar, something started to come out of his mouth. Not blood, though. Something solid and organic, like his own lungs were trying to crawl out from between his teeth. But they couldn't have been his lungs, because although they were all fleshy and pink, just like regular organic tissue. The things that came out of his mouth were all long and thin, almost like the limbs of an octopus or squid. Right after that, we heard Command say something into our earpieces. Affected agent is declared hostile. Open fire. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. They wanted me to shoot that guy, Mom. Only, I hesitated. I couldn't do it. They train you to shoot the bad guys, Mom. They don't train you to murder your own. Like I said, I hesitated, but the other operators didn't. He just raised his rifle and started shooting. But he didn't just shoot the guy a few times. He shot him until he fell, until the blue-white light flickered out and left his eyes. Then he carried on firing into the guy's head and neck as he lay in the dirt, and he kept shooting until there was barely anything left. The SIRG guys were about ready to execute the other operator right there and then. One even had his weapon pointed at the guy, telling him to put down his rifle and put his hands in the air. I think they actually thought that they were going to arrest the guy there and then, but they had no idea what was about to come next. Right then, as the SIRG guys are completely freaking out, ready to just about lynch the other operator, who I only know as Apis, the SIRG comms flickered back to life over all our radios and told them all to stand down. Orders then came down for the SIRG guys to remain in place while the CIED operators, which meant us, were to exfil from the cabin. I was scared they might shoot us in the back as we climbed out of the root cellar, but they didn't. They just did as they were told. Theirs not to reason why, just like one of them had said. As we walked outside, I got the first of many sick-to-my-stomach feelings I've had over the past 24 hours or so. About 20 yards away from the front entrance, there was another team from our unit, and in front of them was 4 body bags, enough to hold each member of the SIRG team. 3 of them were the jet black I've become all too familiar with during my time in the military, but another was unlike any of the body bag I'd ever seen before, bright orange. I don't think I need to tell you which of the SIRG team was to go in that one. Me and Apis were told to stand by as the other team, who all wore the same, all-black, unmarked uniforms our unit normally wears, went into the cabin to collect the body of the dead SIRG agent. Only 2 re-emerged carrying the bright orange body bag, and just as I started to wonder what the others might be doing, I heard a few screams in unison, then the sound of a grenade going off. The explosion was followed by a few shots before everything went quiet. That quiet was only broken by the sound of a voice coming from behind us, a voice saying, "A fine job you did in there, boys." When I turned, I saw the voice came from a short, middle-aged man wearing a tweed jacket while flanked by 2 more black-clad operators. He looked like a librarian and he spoke like one too, in this quiet, almost relaxed voice, one full of calm and confidence. He told Apis to join the rest of the unit in loading what he called the sample onto a waiting chopper back at the cordon. And looking at me, he smiled, and in that same calm librarian's tone, he told me something to the effect of, "I know you're a member of the team, but I don't want you to hesitate like that again. Swiftness of obedience is crucial to our operators' effectiveness, a requirement for moving forward. And that's very, very important. Because for you, there is no going back now." They don't allow us to read any news from outside here, Mom, but I can imagine what the headline said. 4 FBI agents killed in counter-terror raid, while the article goes on to say how they made the ultimate sacrifice in some courageous attempt to bring in some dangerous terrorist, one who opted to blow everyone to pieces rather than to be taken alive. But the truth is, we killed them, Mom. We killed our own guys out there. And I can't be a part of it. I won't be a part of it. I'm going to find a way of sending you this letter after I escape from the base here, but I know they'll be coming to look for me, so I can't come home just yet. Like that guy said, there's no going back for me now. Not if they have anything to do with it. I promise I'll be in touch as soon as I can, but please, when you're done reading this, just burn it. If there's evidence that I've contacted you that you knew I was going to escape, God knows what they'll do to you to get me to come back. Just please know that I love you, Dad, and Steph with all my heart, and that I'll do anything to make sure we can all be together again someday. I love you, Mom. Stay safe, and don't tell them a goddamn thing. Your loving son, Jake. Operator 734-812 was apprehended not far from the Foundation facility following his attempted desertion on the night of March 18, 2017. He has since been terminated, with false records of mental health conditions being planted in his U.S. Navy psych history. To all outside observers, Operator 734-812 suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder following his return from Man Beach, Syria, with these ongoing mental health problems causing a catastrophic breakdown around the same time he volunteered at the Foundation. Operator 734-812 has since been entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System and will remain on said system until he is declared deceased in absentia. The director has recommended a complete review of all recruit psychological testing programs, with new procedures set to come into effect by the end of the year. Although the